It was a cold, rainy afternoon when Kayla, a young black girl, rushed into the hospital in tears. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath shallow, and her heart racing. Every step she took seemed to echo louder in her mind as her feet pounded against the cold, sterile tiles of the hospital floor. She was in agony, both physically and emotionally. She wasn't just in pain, she was terrified. Terrified of what might be happening to her, terrified of the unknown that awaited her behind those hospital doors. Kayla had never felt this way before. Sure, she'd been through her share of struggles. Life hadn't always been easy for her, but she was a fighter. She had always faced challenges head-on, whether at school, with her family, or in her community. But today was different. Today, something was wrong, and she had no idea how to fix it. She couldn't stop the tears, couldn't stop the panic from rising in her chest, each beat of her heart sending waves of dizziness through her head. The moment she burst through that entrance, the receptionist looked up, concern immediately crossing her face. Kayla barely registered the words the receptionist spoke, something about signing in, giving her details, but all she could think of was the pain that had started earlier in the day. A sharp, searing pain in her abdomen that hadn't gone away, and it was getting worse. "Please, I need to see a doctor," she gasped, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. Her hands gripped the counter, knuckles turning white. The receptionist glanced at her for a moment, then, recognizing the urgency in Kayla's voice, nodded and directed her to the waiting area. But Kayla wasn't waiting. She couldn't. She needed answers. She needed help. Without thinking, she pushed past the receptionist and hurried into the back, where the doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to care for those in need. A nurse stopped her, holding out her hand. "Miss, you need to wait your turn," the nurse said gently but firmly. "I can't," Kayla cried out, her voice cracking. "I'm not gonna make it. Please, just help me." At that moment, a young doctor entered the hallway, his eyes immediately locking onto Kayla. Dr. Mason was still in his early 30s, with an easy smile that had earned him the trust of many patients. But seeing the fear in Kayla's eyes, he quickly understood this was no ordinary case. He had seen his fair share of medical emergencies, but something about her distress pulled at his heartstrings. "Is she all right?" Dr. Mason asked the nurse, his voice calm yet laced with concern. Before the nurse could respond, Kayla turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "Please, just help me. I don't know what's happening, but I need to know. It hurts so bad, I think I'm dying." The words struck Dr. Mason deeply. He stepped forward immediately, motioning for the nurse to step aside. He could see how much Kayla was struggling, and the urgency was palpable. "Let's get you checked out right away," he said, guiding her to an examination room. His mind raced as he assessed her condition. What was going on with this young woman? What had caused her to be so frantic? As a doctor, he had seen his fair share of emergencies, but the way Kayla looked, the terror on her face, it sent a chill down his spine. Once inside the examination room, Dr. Mason motioned for Kayla to sit on the bed, taking a quick look at her vitals. He could see that her pulse was elevated, her breathing rapid. But what was really alarming was the way she was clutching her stomach, as if something inside her was tearing apart. "Kayla, I'm Dr. Mason. I'm going to help you, but I need to know what's happening. Can you tell me what led to this pain?" Kayla wiped at her tears, her hand shaking. She swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I don't know. It started this morning. It was just a little ache at first, but it kept getting worse. And then," she gasped, a sharp intake of breath as another wave of pain hit her. "Then it got so much worse. I don't know what's happening. Please, I just need you to fix me." Dr. Mason didn't waste any time. He began to examine her more thoroughly, asking Kayla questions about her symptoms, her history, anything that might give him a clue. But no matter how many questions he asked, there was no clear answer. It was as if the pain was coming from nowhere. No injury, no clear cause. He had to figure it out. As he continued to examine her, Kayla's eyes were glued to him, her breath still shallow, her body trembling with fear. There was something about her presence, something in the way she held herself, that struck him. She wasn't just a patient, she was someone who had seen too much pain in her life. And right now, that pain was physical and overwhelming. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Mason finished his examination. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, deep in thought. Something about this didn't sit right with him. Kayla's symptoms didn't match anything he had seen before, but he was determined to get to the bottom of it. He needed to figure out what was happening, not just for her peace of mind, but for her safety. "Kayla," he said gently, looking her in the eye, "I'm going to order some tests. We need to get to the bottom of this, okay? But I need you to stay calm." Kayla nodded, though she couldn't stop the tears that continued to fall. The uncertainty was unbearable. She was scared, so scared. What if the doctors couldn't find anything? What if they couldn't fix whatever was wrong with her? As Dr. Mason left to arrange for the tests, Kayla sat alone in the sterile room, her mind racing. What could it be? Could it be something serious? Was this the beginning of something worse? But then, just as the door clicked shut behind him, the reality of the situation started to set in. She had rushed in here, desperate for answers, but now she realized she had no idea what to expect. It wasn't just the pain that was driving her. It was the fear of the unknown, and she was about to learn something that would change everything. As the minutes ticked by, Kayla's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A nurse stepped in, holding a clipboard in her hands. Kayla looked up, her heart skipping a beat. "Miss Kayla, the tests have been scheduled, but the doctor needs to speak with you first. It's important." The nurse's words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken tension. Kayla's stomach twisted. What did they know? What was happening? Kayla took a deep breath, her mind racing. The next part of her journey was about to begin, but she had no idea what awaited her behind that door. Kayla sat frozen on the edge of the examination bed, her fingers still trembling as they clutched the edges of the thin, white hospital gown. She tried to steady her breathing, each inhale a struggle, each exhale an attempt to calm the storm swirling inside her. The nurse's words echoed in her mind. "The doctor needs to speak with you first. It's important." What did that mean? What could be so important that they had to speak with her before the tests? The air in the room felt thick, heavy with tension. Kayla glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking sound filling the silence. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours, each tick an agonizing reminder of the unknown. She wiped away another tear, but it was pointless. They kept coming. The fear gnawing at her gut was too much to ignore. Her thoughts drifted back to the events of the morning, the events that had led her to this hospital. She'd woken up like any other day, had breakfast, and gotten ready for work. But then, out of nowhere, a dull ache in her stomach had appeared. She brushed it off at first, thinking it was just cramps, but the pain hadn't gone away. Instead, it intensified. By noon, it had become sharp, stabbing. Nothing she did, lying down, walking, even drinking water, could make it stop. She called her best friend, Jasmine, in a panic, hoping for some comfort, some sense of reassurance. But Jasmine's calm voice did nothing to ease her fear. "You should probably see a doctor, Kay," she'd said, her voice tight with concern. Better safe than sorry. So here she was, sitting in this sterile, white room, hoping that whatever was happening to her could be fixed. But now, the uncertainty of the situation felt even worse than the pain. What were they going to say? What if the tests revealed something serious? Worse yet, what if they didn't find anything at all? The fear of being dismissed, of not being taken seriously, weighed heavily on her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked up, startled. A young nurse stood in the doorway, her face soft with empathy. "Miss Kayla, Dr. Mason will see you now." Kayla stood, her legs shaky as she followed the nurse down the hallway. The walk to Dr. Mason's office felt like it took forever. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, their cold glow adding to the sterile atmosphere. Every step seemed to echo in her head, the sound of her heart pounding drowning out everything else. What was it that the doctor needed to tell her? She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that whatever awaited her beyond that door would change everything. The nurse opened the door to Dr. Mason's office and motioned for Kayla to enter. Dr. Mason was standing by his desk, flipping through some paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he looked up and saw Kayla, his expression shifted to one of concern. "Come in, Kayla. Please have a seat," he said gently, gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. Kayla sat down slowly, her palms sweaty as she wiped them on her lap. She tried to look at the doctor, but her eyes kept drifting to the papers in his hands. There was something about the way he was holding them that made her nervous. It was like he was holding onto something that could change her entire world. "Kayla, I know you've been through a lot today, and I can see that you're still in a lot of pain." Dr. Mason began, his voice calm but serious. "I'm going to be honest with you. The tests you've taken didn't show any immediate signs of injury or infection. But there's something else we've noticed, something we need to discuss." Kayla felt a lump form in her throat. Her heart raced again. What did that mean? Something else. What was it? Dr. Mason took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something difficult. "Kayla, we've reviewed your medical history, and there's something unusual we found. Something that I didn't expect." Kayla's mind was spinning now. She leaned forward, desperate to understand. "What is it? What did you find?" Dr. Mason looked at her, his eyes soft but firm. "There's something in your blood work, something that doesn't belong. It's a rare marker, one we don't usually see in patients your age. It's not necessarily life-threatening, but it's something we need to investigate further. I need to run a few more tests to understand what's going on." Kayla's breath hitched. A rare marker. She had no idea what that meant, but the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. She had always been healthy, never had any major medical issues. And now, here she was, sitting in front of a doctor who was telling her there was something inside her that shouldn't be there. What was this? What had happened to her? "What kind of tests?" Kayla asked, her voice shaky. "Blood tests, scans, some genetic tests to see if there's anything unusual in your DNA." Dr. Mason replied, his tone even but laden with concern. "It's a lot, I know. But I want to get to the bottom of this, Kayla. I want to make sure you're okay." Kayla nodded numbly, her thoughts swirling. What could be in her blood? What could it mean? She had to know. But the fear gripped her tighter now, the thought that something inside her was wrong. Something that couldn't be fixed by a simple pill or treatment. She had to find out, but she didn't know if she was ready to face whatever truth lay ahead. "Okay," Kayla whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do whatever you need to do." Dr. Mason nodded, his face softening. "I'm going to have the nurse schedule the tests for you right away. And in the meantime, try to relax, Kayla. We'll take care of you." But as Kayla walked back to the examination room, a new wave of panic washed over her. Relax? How could she relax when her entire world was being turned upside down? There was something inside her that shouldn't be there. And she had no idea what it was, how long it had been there, or what would happen next. The unknown loomed ahead, dark and threatening. And as the nurse prepared for the next round of tests, Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. What was in her blood? And what did Dr. Mason mean by something we need to investigate further? Stay tuned, because the truth is closer than anyone could imagine. Kayla sat in the sterile examination room, her mind racing. The fear was still there, gnawing at her insides like an invisible force. The nurse had left her alone, telling her to wait for the next set of tests. But all Kayla could do was sit there, her hands clasped tightly together, trying to hold herself together in the face of uncertainty. Every noise outside the room, the faint murmur of doctors talking, the clicking of footsteps down the hall, only served to heighten her anxiety. She couldn't help but replay Dr. Mason's words in her mind. A rare marker, something we don't usually see. What did that even mean? What could be so rare that it sent her entire world into a tailspin? She had lived her whole life without even a hint that anything could be wrong. Now suddenly everything felt fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter her whole existence. She tried to calm herself, to breathe deeply and focus on something other than the endless thoughts spinning in her head. But the more she thought about it, the more the questions piled up. What was the marker? Was it something genetic? Was it a sign of some kind of disease? The uncertainty was unbearable. Every second felt like a countdown to something unknown. Just then, the door opened, and the nurse walked in with a clipboard in hand. Kayla looked up, her eyes searching for some sign of reassurance. But the nurse's face was a mask of professionalism. No hints, no empathy, just the same detached expression that she had seen so many times before in this hospital. Kayla, the nurse said gently, we'll be running a few more tests now. This will take a little while. I know it's a lot to handle, but you're in good hands. Kayla nodded, though she didn't feel reassured. Okay, she whispered, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. The nurse motioned for Kayla to follow, and they walked down the narrow hallway together. The sterile scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, mingling with the coldness of the white walls. It felt as though the hospital itself was pressing in on her, each step taking her further away from the comfort of her normal life. As they reached the testing area, the nurse turned to her. These tests will be non-invasive. We just need to draw some more blood and do a scan. It's important that you stay calm, okay? Kayla nodded again, though it was harder to keep her composure now. The weight of the unknown was suffocating, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it together. She laid down on the examination table as instructed, trying to ignore the sharp cold of the metal under her back. The nurse set out the blood-drawing equipment, her movements quick and practiced, but Kayla's mind was far away. She thought back to the morning she first noticed the pain. At the time, it had seemed like nothing. A dull ache, easy to ignore. She never imagined it would lead to a day like this. But now, as she lay on the examination table, it felt as though her entire world had been thrown into chaos. How could something as simple as a pain in her stomach lead to this? The needle pierced her skin, and she flinched, the sharp sting snapping her back to the present. The nurse continued her work, though Kayla hardly noticed. She was lost in thought, her mind circling back to Dr. Mason's cryptic words. What was this rare marker? And why hadn't anyone told her about it before? How could something so small, something hidden in her blood, be so important? It didn't make sense. As the nurse finished drawing blood, she turned to prepare for the scan, and Kayla tried to push her thoughts aside, forcing herself to focus on what was happening now, but the questions remained, lingering like a shadow that refused to be shaken off. The scan was a blur. The coolness of the gel against her skin, the hum of the machine, the brief flashes of light as the scans were taken. It was all so clinical, so detached from the storm raging inside her. She kept her eyes closed, unwilling to look at the machines or the monitors, knowing they held information that she didn't yet understand. When the test was finally over, the nurse led her back to the examination room. The quiet dread that had been building in Kayla's chest now felt like a weight that was pressing down on her. She didn't know what to expect when Dr. Mason returned, but she knew one thing for sure: nothing was going to be the same after today. As she sat back down on the examination bed, she tried to force her mind to calm, but the questions were still there, buzzing relentlessly. The whole situation felt like a nightmare. What if this was something serious? What if the rare marker was a sign of a disease that couldn't be treated? What if it was something that could change her life forever? The door opened again, and this time it wasn't the nurse. Dr. Mason stepped inside, his face still serious but now with an air of urgency. He looked at Kayla, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. She could see the weight of something unspoken in his eyes, and it made her stomach twist with dread. Kayla, Dr. Mason began, his voice low and steady. We've received the results of your tests, and I need to talk to you about something important. Kayla's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. She didn't know what he was going to say, but she could feel that it was going to change everything. I know this is difficult, Dr. Mason continued, his tone softening, but I need you to listen carefully. The blood work came back with an anomaly. The marker we found, it's not something we typically see in people your age. It's rare, but there's more to it than that. Kayla's pulse quickened. What did that mean? More to it than that. I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Mason said, his eyes locked on hers. This marker, it could be a sign of something much bigger than we first thought. We need to run additional tests, but right now, I want you to try not to panic. I know this is overwhelming, but we're going to take care of you. Kayla opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The fear that had been building inside her for hours was now a full-blown storm, and it felt like it was consuming her. What was happening to her? What was this mysterious marker? Why couldn't anyone explain it to her? "I need you to trust me," Dr. Mason said gently. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure this out together." What as Kayla sat there, trying to process his words, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answer she was about to receive might be more than she could bear.